The sword falls from his fingers. It strikes the blood-soaked earth with a dull sound, a final note in the symphony of screaming that has filled this valley since dawn. The soldier looks down at his hands. They are trembling. They are covered in the blood of men, whose names he will never know. His chest heaves, his legs buckle, and as his knees sink into the mud, made from soil and the life of 1,000 fallen warriors, he sees them coming. 2 figures, walking through the carnage. One of them is laughing. His armor gleams red, not from paint, but from the spray of open veins. His eyes burn with a joy that no mortal celebration could ever match. Each step he takes seems to make the ground itself groan, as if the earth knows him, fears him, wishes he would leave, but knows he never will. Not while there is still one heart beating, with the desire to harm another. The other figure makes no sound. His footsteps fall softer than whispers. His robes are dark, darker than the sky that is now turning from orange to purple, above the mountains to the west. In his hand he carries a torch, but it is inverted, the flame pointing toward the ground, as if light itself has surrendered in his presence. His face is calm. His eyes hold something that might be compassion, might be patience, might be the oldest truth the universe has ever known. Which one should the dying soldier fear? The one who brought him here, who filled his veins with fire and his mind with rage, who made him believe that killing was glorious and dying was noble? Or the one who comes now, silent, inevitable, to collect what was always owed? If these ancient terrors call to you, settle in. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the darkness be your companion tonight. There is much to tell, and the night is long, and these gods have waited centuries for someone to speak their names with the respect they deserve. The Greeks knew fear. They built their entire civilization in its shadow. They feared the sea, with its sudden storms and its hidden monsters. They feared the mountains, where wolves and lions waited. They feared the forests, where anything might lurk between the trees. But more than any earthly terror, they feared their gods. And among those gods, there were 5 whose very names made priests hesitate, made warriors pale, made philosophers fall silent. Tonight, we walk among them. The battlefield stretches in every direction. If you could see it from above, from the vantage point of the eagles that are already beginning to circle, you would see a pattern that has repeated itself across 10,000 years of human history. The bodies do not lie randomly. They cluster at certain points, places where the fighting was thickest, where shield walls crumbled and men died in heaps. Between these clusters, single figures are scattered. Those who tried to run, who made it 10 steps or 20 before something caught them from behind. The smell is overwhelming. Iron and copper from the blood, smoke from the fires that still burn, where tents once stood. Something sweeter underneath, something the soldiers learned to recognize after their first battle, and never forgot no matter how many years passed. The smell of the body surrendering, the smell of what we are, beneath our skin. The sounds are changing now. During the battle, there was no space between noises. Steel on steel, on bone, on leather, on flesh. Screaming that never stopped, that came from so many throats, it became a single voice, the voice of war itself. But now, there are gaps. A moan from somewhere to the left. A horse, wounded, calling for a master who will never come. The crackle of flames. And beneath it all, the whisper of wind through the grass that somehow still grows between the fallen. The light is dying. The sun touches the western mountains, and for a moment, the entire valley turns gold. The blood becomes amber. The armor of the dead becomes treasure. Even the faces of the fallen seem peaceful in that light, as if they have simply laid down to rest after a long day's work. It is a lie, of course, the most beautiful lie the world tells every evening, that endings are gentle, that darkness comes slowly, that there is time to prepare. There is never enough time. The laughing god reaches the dying soldier first. He stands over him, this deity of carnage, and his smile is wide and genuine and terrible. Up close, the soldier can see that his teeth are too white, too sharp, too many. His beard is matted with things the soldier does not want to identify. His breath smells like a forge, hot metal and burning coal. You fought well, the god says. His voice is thunder contained in a throat. For a mortal, the soldier tries to speak. His lips move, no sound emerges. He has screamed so much today that his voice has abandoned him. Fled like the men who broke and ran when the third wave hit. 37. The god continues, crouching down until his face is level with the soldiers. That is how many you killed today. 37 sons, 37 brothers, 37 fathers, 37 futures, ended by your hand. He reaches out and touches the soldier's cheek, almost tenderly. I am proud of you. The soldier feels nothing. He should feel something. Horror, perhaps, at the number. Pride, maybe, at the god's approval. But there is only emptiness, a vast and echoing emptiness, where his soul used to be. This is Ares, the god of war, the god of bloodlust, the god of the courage that lets a man charge into certain death, and the madness that makes him enjoy it. Among the Olympians, he is the most hated. His own father, Zeus, once told him that of all the gods who dwell on Olympus, he was the most despised. His own mother, Hera, queen of heaven, could barely look at him. Among mortals, he was worshipped only by the most desperate, the most savage, the most lost. But the Spartans built him temples. The Thracians called him their greatest god. And every soldier who has ever felt the red haze descend, who has ever forgotten fear and pity and reason in the pure white heat of combat, has prayed to him, whether they knew his name or not. Ares stands. He looks toward the silent figure who has now stopped 10 paces away, waiting with the patience of eternity. He is almost ready for you, brother, Ares says. There is something in his voice that was not there before, something that might be respect, or might be fear. I have done my work. Now you may do yours. The silent one nods, just once. A movement so small it might have been a shadow shifting. Ares turns away. He walks toward the next cluster of wounded, those who still cling to life, those whose suffering still feeds his power. He is whistling, a tune that sounds almost cheerful, a melody that children might sing while playing in summer fields, twisted now into something that will haunt the dreams of any who hear it. The silent god approaches. The dying soldier looks up into his face and finds no cruelty there, no joy, no judgment, only presence, only attention, only the calm focus of someone performing a task they have performed 1,000,000 times before and will perform 1,000,000 times again. You are afraid, the god says. His voice is not loud, but it is clear. It cuts through the moans and the crackling flames and the whisper of wind, like a knife through silk. That is natural. That is right. Fear is the appropriate response to the unknown. The soldier manages a word, one word, forced through his ruined throat. Please. The god tilts his head. The inverted torch in his hand flickers. Please what? He asks. Please let you live? Cannot do that. Your wounds are too deep. Your blood is almost gone. What remains is not enough to sustain the flame of your existence. Please make it quick. It will be quick. It always is at the end. Please tell you what comes next. A pause. That I cannot do either. I only collect. I do not explain. The explanation is not mine to give. This is Thanatos. Death personified, not the god of the underworld, that is Hades, who rules over the dead but rarely participates in the dying. Not the Charis, those vicious spirits who haunt battlefields and feast on blood with savage joy. Thanatos is something else. Thanatos is the moment itself, the threshold, the door that opens only once and never closes again. He is the son of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, and Erebus, the primordial god of darkness. He emerged from the void before the Titans rose, before Zeus was born, before Olympus existed. He is older than most of what we call civilization. He will be here long after the last civilization falls. And he is gentle. This is the truth that mortals rarely understand. They see his brother Hypnos, the god of sleep, as the kind one. They welcome sleep. They close their eyes each night and surrender to his embrace without fear. But Thanatos they flee from. Thanatos they bargain with, beg, curse, deny. They do not realize that the two brothers work in harmony. That sleep is practice for death. That death is simply sleep that does not end. Thanatos kneels beside the soldier. The movement is graceful, unhurried. He places his hand on the man's forehead. The touch is cool, not cold, not icy, just cool. Like the other side of a pillow on a summer night. Like shade after hours in the sun. Like water from a deep well. You carried so much, Thanatos says. The weight of what you did today, the weight of what was done to you, the weight of all the years before, the weight of all the years you will not have. His thumb traces a small circle on the soldier's brow. You may put it down now, all of it. You have carried it far enough. The soldier's eyes are growing dim. The twilight is advancing, both in the sky above and in the failing chambers of his heart. But there is something happening on his face, a softening, a release. The tension that has gripped his jaw and his shoulders and his fists begins to ease. I was so afraid, the soldier whispers. My whole life, I was so afraid. I know, Thanatos replies. Fear kept you alive. Fear made you careful. Fear made you strong in the ways that strength could be measured. But fear also kept you from joy, kept you from peace, kept you from rest. He leans closer. There is no fear where I am taking you. There is no pain. There is only what comes next. And what comes next does not require fear to navigate. The soldier's chest rises, falls, rises again, does not rise. Thanatos remains there for a moment, his hand still resting on the forehead of the man who was, seconds ago, still part of the world of the living. Then he stands. He looks down at the body, and there is something in his expression that mortals are not supposed to see in the face of death. Sadness. Real and profound and ancient sadness. He turns away. There are others waiting. There are always others waiting. The battlefield is full of them, and beyond the battlefield, there are cities where old men are taking their final breaths in beds surrounded by family, and villages where children are succumbing to fevers that no medicine can break, and seas where sailors are sliding beneath waves that will not release them. Thanatos must visit them all. He must be present for each one. He must offer to each of them the same cool touch, the same quiet words, the same release. This is his function. This is his burden. This is his gift. But tonight, we are concerned with fear. And while mortals fear Thanatos above almost all other divine beings, there is a question worth asking. Did the Greeks fear death because death was cruel? Or did they fear death because death was unknown? The answer matters, because cruelty can be reasoned with, can be avoided, can sometimes be turned aside by prayer or sacrifice or clever words. The unknown cannot. The unknown simply waits, patient, certain, unaffected by anything mortals might do to postpone or prevent it. Ares has found another group of dying men. He walks among them like a farmer surveying his harvest. Some he touches, and they find new strength, enough to drag themselves a few more feet before collapsing. Some he ignores, and they slip away in the growing darkness, without divine attention of any kind. Some he looks at with contempt, and these wish they could die faster, wish Thanatos would come for them now, wish for anything other than the burning judgment in the war god's eyes. Cowards. Ares spits at a cluster of wounded, who bear the marks of having been struck from behind, having fled, having chosen survival over glory. You ran, you broke, you let your brothers die, while you thought of nothing but your own worthless skin. One of them looks up. He is young, perhaps 16 summers, perhaps fewer. There are tears on his face, cutting tracks through the blood and dirt. I was afraid, the boy says. I could not help it. I was afraid. Ares laughs. The sound echoes across the valley, bounces off the mountains, seems to shake the very stars that are beginning to appear in the eastern sky. Afraid, he repeats. Afraid. Do you know what fear is, boy? Do you know where it comes from? Do you know who made it? The boy shakes his head. Ares crouches, just as he did with the soldier, just as Thanatos did. But there is nothing gentle in his posture. His proximity is a threat. I have a son, Ares says. His mother is the most beautiful goddess who has ever existed, Aphrodite, love itself, and from our union came many children. Eros, who makes hearts ache with desire. Harmonia, who brings peace where there was discord. And Phobos. He lets the name hang in the air. Phobos, fear itself, panic, terror, the weakness in your legs, and the shaking in your hands, and the voice in your mind that screams at you to run. That is my son. That is my creation. That is my gift to the world. The boy is trembling now. His whole body shakes as if he is cold, though the air is still warm with the heat of the day's violence. Why? The boy manages to ask, why would you create such a thing? Ares tilts his head. For a moment, something almost thoughtful crosses his brutal features. Because war without fear is slaughter, he says. Because without fear, men would fight until nothing remained. Because fear is the boundary. Fear is the limit. Fear is the voice that says enough when courage has forgotten the word. He stands. You feared today, and you ran, and you will die here in the mud like the coward you are. But tomorrow, somewhere else, another boy will fear, and he will run, and he will survive. He will go home. He will have children. He will grow old and die in his bed, with grandchildren at his side. Fear will give him that life. Fear that came from my son. Fear that I placed in the world. He walks away. The boy lies there, processing words that seem too large for his dying mind to contain. Fear as a gift. Fear as protection. Fear as the thing that keeps humanity from destroying itself completely. What happened next would change everything the Greeks understood about the nature of terror. Because somewhere in the darkness beyond the battlefield, in the forests that bordered this valley of death, other gods were watching. Gods older than Ares, gods more powerful than Thanatos, gods whose very existence predated the concepts of war and death themselves. And they were about to make themselves known. The night deepened, the stars multiplied, the last light faded from the western mountains, and the battlefield became a landscape of shadows and memories. The fires died down to embers. The moaning of the wounded grew quieter, as, one by one, Thanatos visited them and offered them release. But there were gods who made even Thanatos hesitate. Gods who made Ares look away. Gods whose names were spoken in whispers even on Olympus, even in the golden halls where Zeus himself held court. These were the gods of fear itself, the gods of punishment, the gods of darkness so complete that even the concept of light had not yet been born. And their story was about to collide with the story of every mortal who ever lay awake at night, heart-pounding, wondering what waited in the shadows. In the forests beyond the battlefield, something moved. It did not walk as mortals walk, with feet pressing against earth, with weight and substance and the small sounds of passage. It flowed, it shifted, it existed in one place and then another, the space between filled with nothing but the memory of dread. The trees here were ancient, oaks that had stood for 500 years, pines that remembered when the first humans came to this land, small and frightened and huddled around fires that seemed so fragile against the immensity of the dark. These trees had seen much. They had watched generations rise and fall. They had felt the vibrations of countless battles through their roots, had drunk deep of blood that seeped into the soil. But even they seemed to lean away from what moved among them now. Phobos walked the edge of the battlefield. He did not need to enter that valley of corpses. His work there was already complete. Every man who had fled, every soldier who had broken and run, every warrior whose courage had crumbled in the face of death, they had all felt his touch. He had whispered in their ears. He had wrapped his fingers around their hearts. He had shown them visions of their own ending, vivid and terrible and inescapable, until running seemed not like cowardice, but like the only sane response to an insane world. Now, he watched. His form was difficult to perceive, even for those with eyes trained to see divine beings. He flickered, he shifted. One moment he appeared as a young man, beautiful in the way his mother Aphrodite was beautiful, with features so perfect, they seemed carved from marble by a master sculptor. The next moment that beauty twisted, became something else, became a face with too many teeth, and eyes that held no whites, only darkness, only the void where courage goes to die. He carried a shield. This was his most sacred object, his symbol, his weapon. The shield bore the face of a lion, but not a lion as mortals knew them. This lion's maw was open in an eternal roar. Its eyes seemed to follow whoever looked upon it. Its mane was made of serpents, writhing, hissing, promising poison and pain. The Spartans had copied this shield, had painted their own versions on their aspides before battle. They thought it would frighten their enemies. They were right, but their copies were shadows of shadows. The true shield, the one Phobos carried, had been forged in the depths of Tartarus by hands that had never seen sunlight. To look upon it fully was to experience fear in its purest form. Not fear of anything specific, not fear of death or pain or loss, but fear itself, raw and primal and absolute. Warriors who glimpsed it forgot their own names. Heroes who faced it felt their muscles turn to water. Even gods, the immortal children of titans and primordials, felt something cold move through them when Phobos raised that shield. Tonight, He kept it lowered. There was no need for it here. The battle was over. The fear he had spread during the fighting was settling now, transforming from sharp terror into something duller, something that would live in the survivors forever. They would wake in the night years from now, decades from now, and feel the echo of what he had given them today. They would never be free of it. Not completely. That was the nature of fear. Once it found a home in you, it never fully left. Phobos moved to the edge of the forest and looked out across the valley. He could see his father out there, walking among the dead with that terrible satisfaction. He could see Thanatos, gentle Thanatos, performing his eternal duty with the same quiet grace he had shown since the beginning of time. He could see the souls of the fallen beginning to drift westward, toward the horizon, toward the entrance to the underworld that waited somewhere beyond mortal geography. And he could feel something else, something approaching. His mother had told him once that he was born from the union of war and love, and that this made him unique among divine beings. Most children of gods inherited the essence of both parents in equal measure. Phobos had inherited something different. He had inherited the space between them, the tension, the contradiction, because war and love were not opposites. His mother had explained. They were twins. They fed on the same energy, the same passion, the same desperate need to connect with something beyond yourself. Fear lived in that space. Fear of losing what you love. Fear of what you might become in war. Fear of the vulnerability that both love and combat demand. Fear of surrender, of opening yourself to another person or another blade, of admitting that you are not complete alone. This is why Phobos was so powerful. This is why even the gods respected him. And this is why he recognized the presence that was approaching, recognized it before he saw any sign of her arrival. Nemesis. She came from the east, from the direction of the rising moon. Her chariot made no sound, though it was pulled by griffins, whose wings should have beaten the air with thunderous force. She wore robes of deep purple, the color of bruises, the color of justice that has turned harsh. In one hand she carried a measuring rod, in the other, a sword. Her face was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes that held the weight of every unpunished crime, every unbalanced scale, every arrogant mortal who had dared to believe themselves beyond consequence. She was not cruel. She was not kind. She was simply inevitable. Phobos, she said. Her voice was like the closing of a door, final, absolute. You have been busy. He inclined his head. Respect, genuine respect, passed between them. They were both children of night in different ways. Phobos through his grandmother's lineage, Nemesis as a direct daughter of Nyx herself. They understood each other in ways that the Olympians, those golden children of sky and earth, could never comprehend. The mortals required my attention, Phobos replied. They were too brave today, too certain. They had forgotten that death was real. I reminded them. Nemesis nodded slowly. Her griffins shifted, their eagle heads turning to survey the battlefield below. There is one, she said, who has not learned. Phobos followed her gaze. Among the wounded, among the dying, among those who waited for Thanatos with varying degrees of acceptance, one figure stood out. He was not wounded. He was not dying. He sat upon a rock at the center of the carnage, and he was laughing. The mortal king. He had commanded this army. He had ordered the attack. He had watched from his position of safety as his soldiers died in waves, and he had felt nothing but satisfaction as the enemy lines crumbled. Now, with victory secured, He sat among the bodies of his own men and laughed at the absurdity of their sacrifice. "His name is Melianthius," Nemesis said. "He has ruled his city for 30 years. In that time, he has committed every excess, stolen from temples, murdered rivals, taken women who did not want to be taken, and he has never faced consequence, not once. His wealth protects him, his power shields him, his arrogance tells him that he is beyond the reach of justice." "And is he," Phobos asked, "beyond your reach?" Nemesis smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "No one is beyond my reach. No one ever has been. But some take longer to find than others. Some require patience. Some require the proper moment." She turned her terrible eyes toward the laughing king. "Tonight is his moment." Below, in the valley, Melianthius called for wine. A servant brought it, stepping over corpses to deliver the cup to his master. The king drank deeply, red liquid spilling down his chin, and raised the cup toward the darkening sky. "To victory," he shouted, "to power, to the weakness of all who oppose me." His laughter echoed across the battlefield, and then it stopped, because something was happening to the darkness around him. It was thickening, condensing, taking form, in ways that darkness should not be able to take form. The torches his servants carried began to flicker. The fires that still burned among the wreckage began to dim. The stars themselves, newly emerged in the evening sky, seemed to draw back, to retreat, to hide from something that was rising from the depths of existence itself. Melianthius felt the first touch of fear. He did not recognize it. He had not felt fear in so long that the sensation was foreign to him, like a word in a language he had never learned. His hand trembled, the wine cup shook, a few drops spilled onto the ground, and where they landed, they turned black, absorbed by the shadow that was spreading beneath his feet. "What?" he whispered. "What is happening?" If these tales of divine justice resonate with you, imagine what other stories await in the shadows of Olympus. There are gods whose names were spoken only in whispers, powers whose existence predated the mountains themselves. And they were all watching now. They were all waiting for what would happen next. Phobos descended from the forest's edge. He moved through the battlefield like smoke through trees, touching nothing, disturbing nothing, yet leaving a trail of renewed terror in his wake. Wounded soldiers who had finally found peace began to shake again. The dying clutched at their weapons, with hands that should not have had the strength to grip anything. Nemesis guided her chariot downward. The griffin's wings spread wide, catching air that seemed thicker than it should be, heavier with the weight of approaching judgment. And from the darkness itself, from the void that had existed before the first light was born, something else emerged. She did not walk. She did not fly. She simply was. And then she was somewhere else. And the distance between those two states contained nothing that mortal minds could comprehend. Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, mother of Thanatos, mother of Nemesis, mother of Phobos's father, Ares, through complex divine lineages that twisted back to the beginning of everything. Grandmother or great-grandmother to half the terrors that plagued mortal dreams. The being so ancient, so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of existence, that even Zeus himself refused to oppose her. There was a story the gods told among themselves, in quiet moments, when they thought no mortals were listening. Once, during the great conflicts that shaped the cosmos, Zeus had pursued Hypnos with murderous intent. The god of sleep had angered the king of Olympus, had aided Hera in one of her schemes against her husband, and Zeus had sworn to cast him into the depths of Tartarus. Hypnos fled. He ran as fast as any god could run, across mountains and seas and the spaces between worlds. And when he could run no further, he did the only thing that could save him. He hid behind his mother. Zeus arrived in fury. Lightning crackled in his fists. His eyes blazed with the power that had overthrown the Titans, that had reshaped the world, that had established him as the supreme ruler of all divine beings. And then he saw Nyx. She did not speak. She did not threaten. She simply looked at him, and in that look was everything that had existed before Zeus was born, before his father Kronos was born, before the Titans themselves drew their first breath. In that look was the darkness that had preceded creation, the void that still waited at the edges of reality, the nothing from which everything had come, and to which everything would eventually return. Zeus lowered his hands. He turned away. He left Hypnos unharmed, and he never spoke of that moment again. This was the being who now emerged from the shadows surrounding King Melianthius. This was the goddess who made even gods afraid. This was night itself, given form and consciousness and a will that no power in existence could oppose. Melianthius screamed. It was not a dignified sound. It was not the battle cry of a warrior or the shout of command that had launched armies. It was the scream of a child who has suddenly realized that the monsters under the bed are real, that the darkness has teeth, that there is nothing between him and the end of everything he has ever known. He tried to run. His legs would not obey him. Phobos stood behind him now, and the god of fear had finally raised his shield. Not fully, not to its maximum effect, but enough to freeze the muscles of a mortal king, enough to lock his knees and cement his feet to the bloody ground. Nemesis descended from her chariot. She walked toward him with measured steps, each footfall a pronouncement, each movement a verdict. Melianthius, she said, king of Thyrea, victor of 17 battles, master of uncounted slaves, defiler of sacred spaces, murderer of the innocent, rapist, thief, liar, tyrant. Each word struck him like a physical blow. His face contorted. His hands rose as if to ward off an attack. Though there was no attack, only truth. I have done nothing wrong, he gasped. I have only done what kings do, what the strong do to the weak. This is the way of the world. This is how it has always been. Nyx spoke. The sound of her voice was not a sound at all. It was the absence of sound, the negative space where sound should be. It entered through the ears, but did not stop there. Penetrated to the core of whoever heard it, settled into the spaces between heartbeats, made itself at home in the darkness that exists behind closed eyes. The way of the world, she said, is balance. For every action, a reaction. For every excess, a correction. For every cruelty, a reckoning. You have escaped these laws for 30 years. Tonight, they collect their debt. Melianthius fell to his knees. His servants had fled. His soldiers lay dead or dying around him. His guards had vanished into the night, driven away by a terror they could not name. He was alone, completely, utterly alone, as he had never been in his entire life of privilege and power. Please, he whispered, I will change. I will be better. I will make offerings. I will build temples. I will free my slaves and return what I have stolen and confess my crimes before the assembly. Please, give me another chance. Nemesis stopped before him. She looked down at his bowed head, at the tears that now streamed down his face, at the trembling hands that clutched at the hem of her robe. You have had chances, she said. Every day of your life has been a chance. Every sunrise brought you the opportunity to choose differently. Every moment of every hour, you could have turned aside from cruelty, could have embraced justice, could have used your power to protect, rather than to harm. You did not. She raised her measuring rod. This is not punishment, she continued. This is restoration. The universe keeps its accounts. What you have taken will be returned. What you have broken will be mended. The scales will balance, as they always do, as they must, as they were designed to do, since before the first star ignited in the void. The rod touched his forehead, and Melianthius saw. He saw every face he had wronged, every servant he had beaten, every rival he had murdered, every woman he had violated, every soldier he had sent to die while he sat safe behind the lines. They appeared before him, not as ghosts, not as spirits, but as memories made manifest, each one carrying the weight of what he had done to them. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their eyes said everything. Their presence was judgment enough. Melianthius began to weep, not the self-pitying tears of a caught criminal, but something deeper, something genuine. For the first time in 30 years, perhaps for the first time in his entire existence, he felt the full weight of his actions. He felt the pain he had caused. He understood, truly understood, what he had been. I was a monster, he whispered. Yes, Nemesis agreed. You were. Phobos lowered his shield. There was no need for it now. The king had found his own fear, had discovered the terror that lay at the heart of self-knowledge. No external force could match it. No lion-headed shield could compare to the horror of seeing yourself clearly for the first time. Nyx watched in silence. Her form shifted constantly at the edges, darkness bleeding into darkness, shadow merging with shadow. She was patient. She had waited since before time began. She could wait a few moments more. What happens now? Melianthius asked. His voice was small, broken, the voice of a child who has finally accepted that consequences are real. Nemesis considered him. The sword in her hand caught the faint light of distant stars. Now, she said, you remember. Every night, for the rest of your life, you will dream of them. You will see their faces. You will feel their pain. You will wake in darkness and know that you can never undo what you have done. This is your balance. This is your debt. Not death, though death will come eventually. Not suffering, though you will suffer. Memory. Endless, inescapable memory of who you were and what you did. She turned away. Phobos followed, slipping back into the shadows from which he had emerged. But Nyx remained. She looked at the broken king for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost gentle. You wonder why we came, she said. Why 3 gods would descend for one mortal's reckoning. The answer is simple. You are not special. You are not unique. You are one of thousands, one of millions, who believe that power exempts them from consequence. We came because you are ordinary, because your crimes are common, because every mortal who hears of this night will know that what happened to you can happen to them. She began to fade. The darkness that was her essence started to dissipate, to spread back into the general night. Fear us, she said, her voice growing distant. Fear death, fear war, fear justice, fear the darkness. These fears are gifts. They are the boundaries that keep you human. Lose them as you lost them, and you become something else. Something hollow, something that invites our attention. She was gone. The night remained, but it was ordinary night now. Stars, and shadows, and the slow creep of moonlight across a landscape of carnage. Melianthius stayed on his knees. He would stay there until dawn, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but remember. His soldiers found him in the morning. They thought he had gone mad. They carried him back to his city on a litter, babbling about faces in the darkness, about scales and measuring rods, about a night so deep it had swallowed his soul. He lived for another 40 years. He freed his slaves. He returned what he had stolen. He confessed his crimes before the assembly and accepted whatever punishment they decreed. But every night, without exception, he woke screaming. This was Nemesis. This was the justice that no wealth could buy off. No power could intimidate. No clever words could deceive. She was not vengeance, though mortals often confused the two. Vengeance was hot, emotional, personal. Nemesis was cold. Nemesis was mathematical. Nemesis was the universe itself, insisting on balance. Her temples were few, but those who knew sought them out. They came not to pray for victory, or wealth, or love. They came to confess. They came to offer what they had taken, before she came to collect it herself. They came with scales in their hands, and fear in their hearts, and the desperate hope that willing balance might forestall forced correction. And in the shadows of those temples, where the torchlight did not reach, other figures watched. Thanatos, waiting for those whose confessions came too late. Phobos, feeding on the terror of those who finally understood consequence. And deeper still, in darkness so complete that even divine eyes could not penetrate it, Nyx observed everything, remembered everything, judged nothing, because judgment was not her domain. She simply existed. She simply watched. She simply waited for the next moment when balance would be restored, when fear would serve its purpose, when death would claim what was owed. But there was something older than fear, something that even retribution could not touch, something that had existed before Nemesis drew her first breath, before Phobos opened his terrible eyes, before even Nyx emerged from the primordial chaos. And it was waiting. Erebus remembered. He remembered the time before time, when there was nothing but potential. No light, no form, no separation between one thing and another. Just existence, vast and undifferentiated, waiting for something to happen. He was that darkness, not the darkness of night, which is merely the absence of the sun, not the darkness of caves, which is simply shadow given depth, not even the darkness of closed eyes, which still contains the memory of light and the expectation of its return. Erebus was the darkness that had never known light, the darkness that existed before the concept of light was possible, the darkness so complete, so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of reality, that it was not darkness at all. It was simply what was. And from that darkness, from that void, from that infinite potential, everything had emerged. The first light, the first form, the first distinction between here and there, now and then, this and that. Erebus had witnessed creation not as an observer, but as a participant. He had been the canvas on which existence painted itself. He had been the silence that made the first sound meaningful. He had been the nothing that gave something its definition. Tonight, he stirred. The battlefield had grown quiet. Thanatos had completed his work, collecting souls with the same gentle efficiency he had practiced since the dawn of mortality. Ares had finally departed, drawn away by the distant sounds of another conflict, brewing somewhere beyond the mountains. Phobos had returned to whatever realm he inhabited between battles. Nemesis had ascended to her celestial patrol, watching for the next imbalance that required correction. Only Nyx remained. She stood at the center of the valley, her form shifting and flowing in ways that mortal perception could not track. Around her, the bodies of the fallen lay in their final positions, illuminated by the pale light of a moon that seemed to keep its distance, as if even that celestial body respected the primordial goddess who ruled its darker hours. "Husband," she said. The word fell into the silence, like a stone into still water, and the darkness answered. Erebus did not emerge. He did not arrive. He simply became present, as if he had always been there and only now chose to be noticed. His form was even less defined than Nyx's. Where she was shadow given shape, he was the absence of shape itself. Where she was the night that followed day, he was the void that surrounded the cosmos. "Wife," he replied. His voice was not a sound. It was the negative space between sounds, the pause between heartbeats, the silence between words. They stood together, these two primordials, these beings who had existed before the Titans rose and fell, before the Olympians claimed their thrones, before humanity crawled out of the mud and began its long, stumbling journey toward meaning. "The mortal disturbed you," Nyx said. It was not a question. "He disturbed the balance," Erebus replied. "He claimed to fear nothing. He boasted that the darkness held no terror for him. He lit torches everywhere he went, filled his palace with lamps and candles and fires, swore that he would banish every shadow from his domain." A pause. Such arrogance could not go unanswered. Nyx nodded slowly. She understood. They had both seen it countless times across countless ages. Mortals who believed they could conquer the fundamental forces of existence. Kings who thought their power extended beyond the material world. Philosophers who convinced themselves that understanding darkness meant defeating it. They were always wrong, because darkness was not an enemy to be defeated. It was not an obstacle to be overcome. It was not even a challenge to be met. Darkness was simply real. Darkness was simply present. Darkness was simply part of what existence meant. As essential as light, as necessary as form, as inescapable as the void that waited at the edges of every illuminated space. "He will remember," Nyx said. "Nemesis has seen to that." "Remembering is not enough," Erebus replied. "He must understand. They must all understand. Fear is not weakness. Fear is wisdom. Fear is the recognition that there are powers greater than yourself, forces older than your species, truths deeper than your comprehension. To fear appropriately is to know your place in the cosmos. Far below, in the valley that had seen so much death, something stirred. King Melianthius had finally risen from his knees. The dawn was still hours away. The moon had reached its zenith and begun its slow descent toward the western horizon. He should have sought shelter. He should have found his surviving soldiers and begun the long march home. He should have done anything other than what he did. He cursed the darkness. Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps it was the desperate bravado of a broken man, trying to reassemble the pieces of his shattered arrogance. Perhaps it was simply the inability of a lifelong tyrant to accept that any power could humble him permanently. Whatever the reason, he stood among the corpses of his men and screamed his defiance at the night. "I am not afraid," he shouted. "Do you hear me? I am Melianthius. I have conquered armies. I have crushed kingdoms. I have made the mighty beg for mercy at my feet. You think your darkness can break me? You think your tricks and visions can reduce me to a trembling child? His voice echoed across the valley. I reject your judgment. I reject your balance. I reject your entire existence. The darkness is nothing. The darkness is merely the absence of light. And I have light. I have fire. I have the will to create illumination wherever I choose, and no primordial void, no ancient shadow, no whispered terror can take that from me. Silence answered him. A profound silence, a complete silence, a silence so total that his own heartbeat seemed deafening by comparison. And then, the torches went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, went out. Every flame within a mile of where he stood simply ceased to exist. The stars overhead vanished behind clouds that had not been there moments before. The moon slipped behind a veil of darkness, so thick it seemed solid. Melianthius stood in absolute blackness. He could not see his own hands. He could not see the ground beneath his feet. He could not see anything at all. And in that absence of vision, his other senses began to fail as well. The sounds of the night faded. The smell of blood and smoke disappeared. Even the sensation of air against his skin grew uncertain, as if the boundary between his body and the void was becoming unclear. You speak of light, Erebus said. The voice came from everywhere, from nowhere, from inside Melianthius's own skull. You speak of fire, you speak of will. These things are precious to you. These things define your sense of power, of control, of meaning. Let me show you what exists beneath them. The darkness deepened. This should not have been possible. The darkness was already absolute. There was no light left to remove, no shadow left to darken, no void left to empty. And yet somehow, impossibly, the blackness became blacker. The nothing became more nothing. The absence became more absent. Melianthius felt himself dissolving. Not physically. His body remained intact, standing upright in the valley of death. But everything else, every thought, every memory, every sense of identity, began to fade. He could not remember his own name. He could not remember how he had arrived at this place. He could not remember that he had a body at all, that he had ever been a king, that he had ever been anything but this formless awareness, floating in an infinite sea of emptiness. This is what was before light, Erebus continued. This is what will be after light fails. This is the truth that your torches and candles and fires have been hiding from you since the first flame was kindled. Not darkness as the opposite of light, darkness as the foundation of everything. The canvas, the context, the mother and father of all that exists. Melianthius tried to scream. No sound emerged. Sound required air, required vibration, required a separation between the one who screams and the medium through which the scream travels. In this void, there was no separation. There was no medium. There was only Erebus, endless and eternal and utterly, completely present. Your ancestors knew, the primordial said, when they huddled around their fires. They did not believe the darkness was their enemy. They knew it was their home. They knew the light was temporary, borrowed, fragile. They knew that every flame would eventually gutter and die, and when it did, the darkness would be waiting, patient, unchanged, ready to welcome them back into its embrace. Time lost meaning. Melianthius might have floated in that void for seconds or centuries. There was no way to measure duration when there was nothing to mark its passage. His consciousness drifted, expanded, contracted, forgot itself, remembered itself, forgot again. I could leave you here, Erebus said. Your body would be found in the morning, standing upright among the corpses, eyes open, heart beating, lungs drawing breath. But you would be gone. Your mind, yourself, your precious arrogance. All of it dissolved into the void. The shell would walk and eat, and perhaps even speak, but there would be nothing inside it. Just darkness, just emptiness, just the echo of a man who thought he could challenge the foundations of existence. Terror, pure, absolute primal terror, flooded through whatever remained of Melianthius's awareness. Not fear of death. Death would be a mercy. This was fear of annihilation, fear of ceasing to exist, while still somehow existing, fear of becoming nothing, while still being forced to perceive that nothingness for all eternity. Please. The word formed without sound. The thought emerged without a thinker. The plea rose from the depths of a consciousness that no longer had a source. Please, I understand. I was wrong. The darkness is not my enemy. The darkness is not nothing. The darkness is everything, and I am less than nothing compared to it. Please, let me go. Let me return. I will never speak against you again. I will never light a torch without remembering what it hides. I will teach my children and my children's children to respect what came before light and what will remain after light ends. Silence, a silence that stretched across eternities. And then, slowly, impossibly, the darkness began to recede. Melianthius found himself on his knees. The ground was solid beneath him. The air was real against his skin. The sounds of the night, subtle and quiet, but present, filtered into his ears. His hands rose before his face, and though he could not see them in the moonless black, he could feel them, could sense their shape and weight and reality. He was still in the void. The absolute darkness still surrounded him, but he was himself again, diminished, transformed, humbled beyond any humiliation he had ever imagined, but himself. Remember this, Erebus said. The voice was fading now, withdrawing back into the spaces between atoms, into the gaps between moments, into the vast and patient emptiness that underlay all of creation. Remember what lives beneath your fires. Remember what waits when your candles burn low. Remember that the darkness does not hate you, does not judge you, does not seek your destruction. It simply is, simply was, simply will be, and in the end, everything returns to it. Everything. The clouds parted. The moon emerged, pale and cold, but impossibly welcome. Stars appeared, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The ordinary darkness of night, the friendly darkness, the darkness that merely meant the sun was elsewhere, settled over the valley like a familiar blanket. Melianthius wept. He wept as he had never wept before. Not even when Nemesis had shown him the faces of his victims. Those had been tears of guilt, of regret, of belated conscience. These were tears of gratitude, gratitude for existence, gratitude for form, gratitude for the simple, miraculous fact that he was something rather than nothing, that he had boundaries and thoughts and a self that could perceive its own existence. He would never be the same. The king who returned to Thyrea was not the king who had left. He spoke rarely. He smiled seldom. He never again ordered another man to die in his name. He dismantled his army, gave his wealth to those he had wronged, and spent his remaining 40 years in quiet contemplation. But there was one thing he did without fail. Every night, before sleep took him, he would extinguish every light in his chamber. He would sit in the darkness, feeling it press against his skin, feeling it fill the space around him, and he would whisper words of respect to the void. "I remember," he would say. "I remember what you are. I remember what I am not." And somewhere in the infinite depths of existence, Erebus heard him and was satisfied. The other gods had been watching. Ares, from whatever battlefield currently held his attention, felt a flicker of something that might have been respect. He dealt in violence, in blood, in the crude mathematics of physical destruction. What Erebus had done was something else entirely. Something subtler, something that left the body intact while reshaping the soul. Thanatos, still moving among the dying in distant lands, paused in his eternal work and considered. He brought endings. He closed chapters. He escorted consciousness from one state to another. But even he could not do what Erebus had done, could not dissolve the boundaries of self while preserving the capacity to perceive that dissolution. Phobos, hiding in the shadows between one terror and the next, felt the echo of his grandfather's power and trembled. He was fear. He was the master of panic, the lord of dread, the architect of nightmares. But what Erebus offered was not fear. It was the absence of everything that made fear possible. It was the void before fear existed. It was the truth beneath the truth, beneath the truth. And Nemesis, watching from her celestial chariot, allowed herself a rare moment of uncertainty. She maintained balance. She ensured that excess was corrected and debt was paid. But how did you balance the void? How did you measure what existed before measurement was possible? How did you judge? The judge of all judges. These questions had no answers. Perhaps that was the point. The night continued. Across the Greek world, mortals slept and woke and lived their small, flickering lives. They lit their fires and told their stories, and tried not to think about what waited in the darkness beyond their walls. Some of them succeeded, some of them forgot, for years at a time, that the primordial void existed at all. But some of them remembered. In temples dedicated to forgotten gods, priests kept vigil through the darkest hours. In caves beneath mountains, mystics meditated on the nature of emptiness. In humble homes at the edges of civilization, grandmothers told grandchildren stories of the powers that had existed before the world was born. Fear them, be you bioclar soil dirty. Fear the darkness, and the death, and the war, and the judgment. Fear these things, because fear is what keeps you human. Fear is what reminds you that you are small, that you are temporary, that you are dependent on forces you can never control. Lose that fear, and you lose yourself. Lose that fear, and you become like Melianthius, a hollow shell, making hollow boasts to powers that could unmake you with a thought. The children would nod, eyes wide, pulling their blankets closer. But also honor them, the grandmothers continued. Honor the darkness for giving light its meaning. Honor death for giving life its value. Honor war for showing us what peace is worth. Honor judgment for maintaining the balance that lets anything exist at all. These are not evil gods. These are not cruel gods. These are necessary gods. They are the bones of existence, the framework on which everything else is built. And then, in that darkness, something unexpected happened. A Yeni gun approached, not immediately, not quickly, but in the east, so far beyond the horizon that no mortal eye could perceive it. The first faint hint of gray began to lighten the absolute black. Dawn was coming. Dawn would always come, eventually, no matter how long and dark the night. This too was part of the balance. This too was part of what made the feared gods sacred, rather than simply terrible. because the five most feared gods of the Greek pantheon, Thanatos, and Ares, and Phobos, and Nemesis, and the primordial pair of Nyx and Erebus, were not simply forces of destruction. They were forces of definition. They drew the lines that made meaning possible. Without death, life would have no urgency. Without war, peace would have no value. Without fear, courage would have no weight. Without judgment, virtue would have no reward. Without darkness, light would have no contrast. They were the shadows that made the light visible, and they were waiting still, waiting for the next mortal who forgot, the next king who grew arrogant, the next philosopher who thought he had conquered fear, the next child who stayed up too late and saw something moving in the darkness at the edge of the firelight. They were waiting, and they were patient, and they would be there for as long as existence itself endured. The sun rose over the valley of death. Golden light spilled across the mountains, painting their peaks with colors that seemed impossible after the darkness of the night. Pink and orange and pale yellow, bleeding into the deep blue of the sky that was slowly, gently brightening. Birds began to sing. Insects emerged from their hiding places. The world, indifferent to the carnage that covered one small valley, continued its eternal rhythms. Among the bodies, survivors stirred. They had hidden through the night, these fortunate few, buried beneath corpses, pressed into ditches, concealed in the tall grass at the valley's edge. They had heard things in the darkness, voices that did not belong to any mortal throat, sounds that their minds could not process, and so discarded as fever dreams, as trauma's hallucinations, as anything other than what they truly were. Now, they rose. They looked at each other with eyes that would never be the same. They had seen too much. They had heard too much. They had felt, pressing against the thin membrane of their sanity, powers so vast and ancient that the human mind was not designed to comprehend them. One of them, a young soldier whose name history would not record, looked toward the center of the battlefield. There, kneeling in the mud, was the figure of King Melianthius. His robes were torn. His crown was gone. His face, visible even from this distance, bore an expression that the soldier had never seen on any human countenance. Peace, not happiness, not contentment, not the smug satisfaction that had characterized the king throughout his long and brutal reign. Something else, something that looked almost like relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, as if a question that had tormented him for decades had finally been answered. The soldier approached. His feet made soft sounds in the blood-soaked earth. His armor, dented and stained, clinked gently with each step. He stopped a few paces from the kneeling king, uncertain whether to speak, uncertain whether the man before him was even capable of hearing. "My lord," he said. Melianthius turned his head. His eyes focused slowly, as if returning from a great distance. "I know you," the king said. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw by screaming and weeping and the terrible silence of the void. "You are one of my soldiers. You fought yesterday. You killed for me." The soldier nodded. "I did, my lord. And you survived the night." "Yes, my lord." Melianthius was quiet for a long moment. The sun continued to rise. The light crept across the valley, touching the faces of the dead, making their frozen expressions somehow more peaceful, somehow more human. "I have ruled for 30 years, the king said finally. "In that time, I have ordered the deaths of thousands. I have burned cities. I have salted fields. I have made widows and orphans beyond counting. And do you know what I learned last night?" The soldier shook his head. I learned that none of it mattered. He laughed. It was a soft sound, entirely unlike the booming roar that had echoed across 100 victory celebrations. Not in the way I thought it mattered. I believed I was building something, a legacy, a name that would echo through the ages. I believed that power was the point, that conquest was the purpose, that the strong ruling the weak was the natural order of things. I was wrong. He stood. His legs trembled, but they held him. The natural order of things is darkness. The natural order is the void. Everything we build, everything we conquer, everything we achieve, it all returns to the darkness eventually. The empires crumble. The names are forgotten. The strong become weak and the weak become dust. And the dust becomes nothing at all. The soldier did not know what to say. He had followed this man into battle countless times. He had watched him laugh as enemies begged for mercy. He had seen him order executions without a moment's hesitation. The person standing before him now seemed like a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Go home," Melianthius said. "Find your family. Hold them close. Tell them you love them. Not tomorrow, not when there is time, but now, today, because the darkness is coming for all of us, and the only thing that matters, the only thing that ever mattered, is what we do in the light while we have it." The soldier bowed. He did not know what else to do. When he straightened, the king was already walking away, moving slowly through the field of corpses, stepping carefully around bodies he would once have stridden over without a second thought. This is what the feared gods gave. Not just terror, not just pain, not just the paralysis of confronting powers beyond comprehension. They gave perspective. They gave truth. They stripped away the comfortable lies that mortals wrapped around themselves, and showed, in stark and inescapable clarity, what existence actually was. Thanatos showed that life was finite, that every moment was borrowed, that the only currency worth spending was time, and every second wasted in cruelty or selfishness was a second that could never be recovered. Ares showed that violence had consequences, that the glory of battle was painted in blood, that every victory required a sacrifice, and those who celebrated war without understanding its cost were fools dancing on graves. Phobos showed that fear was wisdom, that the trembling in your hands before danger was not weakness, but intelligence, that the body knew, even when the mind denied, that some threats were real and some situations demanded retreat. Nemesis showed that balance was inescapable, that the universe kept its accounts with perfect precision, that every excess would be corrected, every debt collected, every injustice answered, if not today then tomorrow, if not in this life then in whatever came after. And Nyx and Erebus, the primordial pair, showed the deepest truth of all, that existence itself was a gift, that form and thought and identity were not guaranteed but granted, that the void from which everything emerged was patient and eternal, and waiting and gratitude for being something rather than nothing was the only appropriate response. Centuries passed. The valley where King Melianthius received his revelation became a sacred place. Shepherds who wandered there reported strange sensations, a feeling of being watched, a whisper at the edge of hearing, a sudden, overwhelming awareness of their own mortality, followed by an equally sudden, equally overwhelming gratitude for being alive. Some fled and never returned. Others knelt in the grass and wept and walked away transformed. The temple was built, not a grand structure with marble columns and golden roofs, like the temples to the Olympians. This was a simple shrine, stones arranged in a circle, surrounding an altar that was always cold, always dark, always shadowed, even when the sun stood directly overhead. Priests came, strange men and women who did not flinch from darkness, who could sit in perfect blackness for hours, days, weeks at a time, who claimed to commune with the primordials, to receive their wisdom, to serve as bridges between mortal understanding and divine truth. They taught that death was not an enemy but a teacher, that to live well, one must first accept dying, that the desperate clinging to life that characterized most mortals was itself a kind of death, a refusal to truly engage with existence because existence was temporary. They taught that war revealed character, that in the crucible of combat, every pretense was stripped away, that heroes and cowards were made in the same moments, by the same pressures, and the difference between them was not strength or skill, but something deeper. They taught that fear was a guide, that the things you feared most were often the things you most needed to face, that running from fear was running from growth, that sitting with fear, breathing through fear, acting despite fear, was the path to becoming fully human. They taught that justice was inevitable, that those who escaped punishment in the mortal world had merely postponed their reckoning, that Nemesis did not forget, did not tire, did not negotiate, that living justly was not sacrifice but self-preservation, that treating others well was not weakness but wisdom, and they taught that darkness was home. This was the hardest lesson. This was the teaching that most students rejected, that most seekers could not accept. The primordial void was not something to be feared. The priests insisted it was something to be embraced. It was the ground of being, the foundation of existence, the mother and father of all that was and is and ever will be. The centuries continued. The Greeks gave way to the Romans, and the Romans gave their own names to the feared gods. Thanatos became Mars, Ares became Mars, Phobos became Timor, Nemesis kept her name, became even more prominent, was worshipped at gladiatorial games and military camps, and anywhere that mortals sought to ensure that their victories would not bring divine retribution. Nyx became Nox, Erebus kept his name, as he had kept it since before names existed, and still they were feared, still they were honored, still, in the quiet hours of the night, in the moments before battle, in the courtrooms where judgment was rendered, mortals whispered their names and hoped that the attention of these terrible, necessary, sacred beings would fall elsewhere. The story returns to now, to this moment, to you, listening in the darkness, perhaps unable to sleep, perhaps seeking peace, perhaps simply curious about the gods who made even other gods afraid. You have met them now, Thanatos, who will come for you one day with soft footsteps, and a gentle touch, and an inverted torch pointing toward the ground. He is not your enemy. He is your guide. He is the one who will show you the door when your time in this room is complete. Ares, who lives in every conflict, every argument, every moment when the red haze descends and reason retreats. He is not your friend, but he is your teacher. Phobos, who has touched you more times than you can count. Every racing heart, every cold sweat. He is not your tormentor. He is your protector. Nemesis, who watches everything you do. She is not your judge. She is the universe's accountant. She simply ensures that the books balance. And Nyx and Erebus, the primordials, the ancient ones, the darkness that was before and will be after, they are not your enemies. They are your origin and your destination. The night is growing late now, or perhaps the dawn is approaching. Let it come. Do not fight it. The darkness is not your enemy. The sleep is not the end. You will wake again, and the light will be waiting, and the world will continue. And when the final sleep comes, the one from which there is no waking, you will be ready, because you have walking, for a little while, in the company of the 5 most feared gods of ancient Greece, and they have shown you what existence truly is. Not a curse, not a punishment, a gift, a miracle, a single, precious flame, burning in the infinite dark. Guard it well. It is all you have. It is everything.